Well, good morning on this cold Monday morning. We're going to do drive time again today. So, had a late night and a early morning, but we're going to do drive time. So, Monday's always a busy day. Bunch of things are going on, and just trying to manage the moment the best that we can, right? And I was reading in Jeremiah today, and that's our reading plan for today is Jeremiah chapter 1 and 2. And Jeremiah 1:5 is always an interesting verse. I knew you before, I made you, I knew you before you were in the womb. And the pro-life stance has always taken that verse to be, they've claimed that verse so much concerning, that God knew us before we were formed. He knew us, he chose us, he set us apart. And so the pro-life movement has used that verse to help others understand that there is something to life prior to conception when you talk about God, and certainly there is life at conception. But that's not the topic for today, because when I look at, and if you will look at the larger context of what's going on, chapter 1 is actually the call of Jeremiah. And God is talking to Jeremiah, and he's calling him out from what he has been doing to become his prophet and his spokesman as Israel is, or Judah is preparing to go into exile. And so Jeremiah is, of course, the one who will also write Lamentations, which is his eulogy as Jerusalem falls. And so you've got here in chapter 1 and verse 5 of Jeremiah, this call of Jeremiah, and some interesting things come to light theologically. And so we're going to do theology on the drive today with Pastor Aaron. So because when you look at this, that God says, I knew you, I set you apart, I chose you for what I'm calling you to. It begs the question for many today that it deals with how much is God sovereign and how much does humanity have to say in the matter. And there's lots of schools of thought, but there's really two ends of the spectrum when we're talking about spiritual. We're talking about Christian viewpoint on the situation. On the one end, you have the total and complete dominating sovereignty of God. Now, I know I say dominating, and that feels really difficult, but when we talk about this end of the spectrum, the complete sovereignty of God, those who would hold to this complete end, this extremist end, will believe that humanity, it's nothing but chess pieces on a chessboard, that God is simply up there playing chess and moving the players. And that another way to look at it is that we are nothing more than Pinocchio tied to some puppet strings, that God is the puppet master and he is just there controlling every facet of every move. And we have no say in the matter. We have no decision making in the matter, that even in our viewpoint of we have these decisions to make, you really have no decisions to make, because it has all been predetermined for you ahead of time because of the sovereignty of God. And so that's one view of things. Sometimes this may be called Calvinism or hyper Calvinism. Just to be fair, if you'll read John Calvin, he's not as extremist as his followers would be, the next generation that would follow him, that would learn his teachings and then begin to reteach them. They created what I would call hyper Calvinism, which is even more to the extreme than I truly believe John Calvin actually was. You read his Institutes of Religion, here's a lawyer trying to make sense of how God is controlling the earth, and he's going to use legal terms, and he's going to use legalese and all these things. So he's very cut and dry, but his followers created it to be even more extremist in that there is no choice, there is no opportunity for humanity to make a choice, and that we are nothing more than puppets being controlled by a puppet master. On the whole other side of the coin is the free will of man idea. And Arminius is the one who really came up with this. He's not the only one who has come up with this. And on the extreme side of this is that basically God spun everything into orbit. He spun everything up into creation, and then basically is hands off and is just sitting back and watching it all unfold. Not that he doesn't have any sovereignty. If you really take this position to its extreme, God doesn't really care. And because humanity just needs to deal with it on its own, they'll find their way to God. Now, in an Arminius perspective, God still provided Jesus, and so it's not a works-based salvation, but wow, does it get close. Because you move away, the further you move away from the sovereignty of God, the more you move into humanism, as what we would call it today, the human spirit, the human ability, the human faculties, the human condition, the human choice, and it's all on humanity to make this thing happen. And so when you look at this other end of the spectrum, we have all the control. We make all the decisions. That, you know, this is, in my opinion, this is kind of where the blurred lines happen with the prosperity gospel, the health and wealth preachers. Why? Because they will say, oh, you got to have more faith, but who's conjuring that up? You are. And when things go wrong in your life, who do they blame? They blame you. And they say, well, you didn't have enough faith, so this is why mama died. You didn't pray hard enough. Well, you should be rich by now. And if you had more faith, and if you would give to my ministry, then you know. And so here we get into this freedom and the free will of man that really turns into humanism. And the health and wealth and the prosperity gospel preachers have done nothing more than take humanism and spin it with spiritual concepts enough to make it sound glorious, but in reality, it is on the verge of demonism. So you've got, on this other side, you've got this whole freedom of man to make a decision. And so which is it, right? I mean, is God sovereign or is he not? Well, we truly believe God is sovereign. We also believe, based upon a multitude of scriptures that we could dive into another time, we have decisions to make. You know, and when Jesus, the famous verse, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whosoever should believe. Okay, somebody's got a decision to make, right? So therefore, we've got some kind of balance that we have to understand. To me, there's a balance, and I fall more in the middle ground. I truly believe in the sovereignty of God. I also believe that in the sovereignty of God, he has given humanity some freedom to make some decisions. That I believe God wants us to freely choose him. And he's going to provide so many things in his sovereignty. But he wants us and has allowed us to have some freedom to make some decisions, which means that we have the freedom to choose faith in Jesus and go to heaven when we die. And we, as humanity, also have the freedom to deny Jesus and have hell to look forward to after we die. God doesn't send us to hell so much as we have chosen to do that. And in that, God, in his sovereignty, it's his heaven. He doesn't allow anybody in that's not placed faith in the activity of Jesus to satisfy the needs of the sin in their life. I know that sounds complicated, but that's just the reality of it. As I see it, as we have a typical Baptist belief in that, that it's a balance of things, that there is the sovereignty of God, there is the freedom of man to choose. So when God says to Jeremiah, look, I chose you, I set you apart. How does that work? Did Jeremiah have a choice? I think he did. But here's the thing. And this gets into another attribute of God that I don't have time on the drive time to talk about today. But another attribute of God is what God knows versus what God allows. And this is intriguing to consider. God knows every choice you're going to make, but he allows you to make those choices. And some who want to philosophize some things say, well, then you really don't have a choice. If God already knows, now look, what God knows ahead of time and what God makes you do or allows you to do is two different things. In the same way, you can, for instance, I know my kids, and if when one of my children was younger, if I were to leave candy out on the table, I already know what's going to happen to that candy. It's going to be gone. Okay? I know it's going to be gone. I know my child. I know my partial creation. I know what's going to happen. Okay? In the child's mind, they're making the decision to take that candy. The problem is I didn't force the child to take the candy. I didn't make the child to take the candy. I just knew ahead of time the candy was going to be gone if I left it on the table. So here's an example of how we can find these balances of things. God knows everything you're going to do. God knew that I was going to become a pastor. I didn't know that. Not early in my life, not in my teenage years, I didn't know that. But God had already wanted that to happen. And it is a quizzical thing to consider, because did I choose it or did I have a choice in it? Was it something that was just going to happen regardless of what I did? See, the problem comes because we can't understand the divine. We are not divine, and we can't understand the divine. And so it's very, very complicated for us to understand in our finiteness, in our humanity. If I know my child is going to make this decision that creates harm in their life, I don't want that to happen. So therefore, God isn't going to let that happen. And yet we know that stuff happens. So this is where faith and trust come in. I trust in the love and the faithfulness of God. I trust in his ability to handle what I don't understand. And I am thankful that he gives me the ability to make some decisions. But I also recognize that there is no surprising God. I'm not going to make a decision. I can't juke God. I can't look left but go right. This is not going to surprise God. He's going to know. He knows everything. But he allows us the freedom to choose anyway. Now, that's deep for a Monday, and it's deep for a drive time. But when you look at the call of Jeremiah, which I think it's more of a calling of Jeremiah than a true pro-life position. I think there's other places you can look and find pro-life and conceptual issues. But this is really the call of Jeremiah, and it does beg the question, how much choice do we have in the matter? I think Jeremiah had a choice. I think God already knew what he was going to choose. I think God has plans in place. I have plans for you. I know what I'd love to be able to accomplish through you. And frankly, God already knows what he's going to accomplish through you. But it's this opportunity for you to get on board with what God's already up to, which is really a Henry Blackaby idea, that if you really want to truly experience God, then you need to see what he's already up to. That's step one in experiencing God. And then you need to choose to join him in that. You need to say, look, I see what God's doing. I see how God's working, and I want to get in on that. I want to be a part of what's going on, and I want to do that too. And in that, you begin to have this partnership with God. You in your humanity, God in his sovereignty, and we come together in order to accomplish the Great Commission through the great commandments of love. And in that, we find our pathway and we find our way. Jeremiah would become a great prophet, have a major work in the Old Testament, as he would be speaking to a people that would not listen, leading a people that would not follow. And I don't know, I mean, that's so depressing. And as a pastor, I have experienced that in a very small scale at different points in my ministry life. I can't imagine being told up front, look, you're going to preach for the next 30 years, but nobody's going to listen to you. And you're gonna go through some stuff. I mean, he would buy land, he'd be imprisoned, he'd be in shackles, he'd have to deal with all this. He'd be ridiculed and mocked and just disregarded and disrespected. And yet, how in the world? And this is the human ask. How in the world could he continue to do that in the midst of all that? It's because of the call of God that was secured in his heart and his life. And therefore, now you and I have a question to ask. What is God calling me to do? What has God set me apart to do? What is God wanting of me? What is it that God sees being accomplished through my life this day, this week, as we close out October? What is it that God wants to accomplish in and through your life? Because trust me, he's got something in mind. He's got something great in mind for you. The question is, are you going to receive it? Are you going to walk with it? Are you going to go forward with it? That's a choice. We all have the choice. And I'm telling you, the state of blessedness that we have examined the last 4 weeks, and we concluded yesterday, is this state of blessedness comes when we get on board with God and we move with God and we allow him to lead our lives. And when that happens, that is a blessedness that is incomparable to anything else. Hey, this week we are preparing for frenemies. We're going to be looking at the book of Jude throughout the first 4 weeks of November. We're going to spend 4 different times in the book of Jude looking at frenemies. Now, a frenemy is somebody that acts like a friend but's really an enemy. And there are some examples of that in Scripture. So I challenge you to find some of those. I have some in my mind. Do you yet? Somebody that seems like they're friendly, but really they have poor motivations and bad motivations or bad thoughts for you or against you. Jude's having to deal with this, and he's having to unravel some of this and help the people understand it. And so we're going to walk through Jude together here in the month of November. And so we're getting ready for that this coming Sunday. Hey, don't forget, tomorrow is Talk It Out Tuesday, as we are going to answer your questions. So submit questions, put them in the chat box here. Email me, message me, text me your questions, and I'll be happy to answer them tomorrow as we have Talk It Out Tuesday. Well, thank you for joining me on my commute into the office this morning. You have a great Monday. Stay dry, stay warm, stay healthy. You guys have a great day.